new? 9.1% unemployment in America, and everyone's doing just fine.
It's very clear that private sector jobs have been doing just fine. It's the public sector jobs where we've lost huge numbers. And that's what this legislation is all about.
The head of the Senate says we need more government jobs to get the economy going. After all, they've got D.C. going. The nation's capital is now the capital of wealth in America. The average compensation last year, $126 grand. But someone here says for out-of-work Americans outside the Beltway, that's the problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Butner. This is Bulls and Bears. Let's get right to it. The Bulls and Bears this week, Tobin Smith, Jonas Max Ferris, Todd Schoenberger from the Black Bay Group, along with Accent Asset Management Scott Martin and Susan Ox, a former senior advisor at the Treasury Department. Welcome to everybody. Scott, the private sector's just fine. We need more government jobs.
Brenda, another case of, hey guys, the government knows best. The government says we create the best jobs, not the private sector. Brenda, oh right, yeah, right, Toby. You know, since the recovery began in 2009, the private sector has lost, over 1 million jobs. The government's created about 100,000, yet unemployment's at 9.1%. GDP is struggling at just over 1%. We're doing great.
Okay, Susan, well, unemployment has fallen in about half of the states.
You know, I don't agree with Senator Reid's characterization that the private sector is fine, but I think the point he's trying to make is that if you look at the past year, the private sector is adding jobs, albeit very anemically, but they're adding jobs, whereas the public sector has lost 300,000 jobs over the past year. And these are not the big sitting on the public dole jobs. These are firefighters, police officers, first responders, and teachers. And this is sort of a defensive play for the economy to say we can't afford to continue losing these jobs at this level. It's going to start to impact society and our safety.
Toby, isn't there a reason for that?
Well, sure there is. I mean, there's two issues here. Most times, for instance, teachers' education is paid for by property taxes in these various regions. And the properties were way overvalued. They're coming back to a normal value, and the tax revenues are a lot less. We had too many employees that lived on that dole, and we have to adjust to the new reality. What he's saying also is he wants to hire specifically jobs that are union jobs. And, of course, these union jobs are the same people who donate to the Democratic Party. So you can't say this is not crony capitalism at its worst.
Now, Todd, Susan says that these are basically looking at lawyers in Washington. But in fact, a lot of federal jobs pay a lot more than the private sector.
Yeah, you got that right, Brenda. Look, you already talked about it, $126,000, but look at some of the other jobs in the federal government right now. You can just simply look at a cook. They make $65,000 a year, 47% more than what you're going to get in the private sector. Broadcast technician makes more than double, 85 grand a year.
Don't tell our guys that
versus $41,000 a year. It goes on and on. Look, the inflation is there with just these jobs alone. Now, we're not saying get rid of all the government jobs, but there clearly has to be a step back on some of these salaries.
But the folks that are being targeted in this bill, the teachers, the firefighters, their median income is $47,000 a year. Okay, this is not the big headline number in those.
Not with benefits. Not with benefits.
Not with benefits.
Okay,
Susan.
we got a lot of friends here without benefits, it seems like, and I will say that there's a reason that federal workers make a lot more money than people. Yeah, okay, the health care plans and the pensions are a little more lucrative than the private sector.
A little.
The federal government, you know, there's not a lot of people who work for the federal government. It's less than 1% of the country. It hasn't grown. It's lower now than it was in the 80s under Reagan. And frankly, they usually have college degrees. They're usually in their 40s and 50s. The private sector has a lot of low-end jobs, a lot of lower-age jobs. They're never going to make as much money as federal workers just because of those two factors.
Which country are you living in right now? Are you kidding me? The red tape, the bureaucracy that's there. These people are working 9 to 5. You work in the private sector, you're working 14 hours a day. You have all these smokers in the federal government. That's an extra 2 weeks of vacation.
But Tom, you're talking about a very, very small amount of people. It couldn't be ruining. It's not why the budgets are all screwed up. The budgets are screwed up because all the spending that goes on. This wage force is very small.
Jonas,
but Jonas, we added 200,000 federal jobs from 2009 to 2011. That happens to be a fact. But the real issue here is that in D.C., It's not just this job, this person with the job in the Capitol. There's 3 other jobs that are dependent on them that are in the outside. I mean, I live in the Beltway area. All the contractors, the subcontractors, the subcontractors.
If you look at every unemployment,
that spending is not reasonable, and it's a private job.
Do you
not a public
deny
job.
that the unemployment rate would be below 9% if government workers weren't being cut every month as fast as they have been?
I would not deny that, but we're talking about the economy, and at some point in time, the economy gets soft because we can't support all this spending, and that's the issue.
Tobin, there's going to be more government firing, state, local, federal,
as
under
there
this
should be.
Administration than
it's about time.
probably
It's
in
way
the
too
100
late.
years.
We can't afford them. I mean,
well, I'm telling you, that's what the problem is the
what
private
took them
sector
so
is
long?
flat.
Right. I mean,
but you can't criticize. This is the first time in the 2000s, government workers jumped, private sector workers declined. They're in a whole decade, and that's luckily federal workers, private workers are flat
and their
now.
pay still went up, Jonas.
How do you explain that in the last 10 years, the government workers climbed and private sector workers declined, other than the economy doesn't need these private sector workers?
Yeah, but Jonas, their pay went up over that period of time. Private sector work pay went down. And I mean, that's the whole problem. They actually shrunk, yet their pay went up. I mean, how does that make any sense?
Well, yeah, and again, Jonas, when you take let's say the 1.7 million jobs in direct, there's another 4 million indirect jobs that are all coming from this same source. We don't have the income to be able to do that. If we raise all the taxes on everybody another 10%, we still wouldn't have the income to keep these people. We have to get in balance, and the private sector knows this, and that's one of the reasons why we have an unstable economy. People are sure that our unsustainability is unsustainable.
Susan, you want to jump in?
Well said.
Well, I just don't know how, when you have a world where businesses and every survey you read are saying we have a skills gap, we don't have the high enough education of people, that you're going to try to cut teachers. We lost 26,000 state and local education jobs just last month. So the idea that we're going to shortchange our kids and somehow maintain our economic dominance in the future is just ridiculous.
Yeah, but how many of those 26,000 were actually administrators? You know, in many of these states, we have 1 administrator for every 3 teachers. In the countries that are kicking our butt, they have 1 administrator for every 20 teachers. So you can't tell me
China is kicking our butt. Are you telling me that our federal government is growing as fast as theirs is?
China is not kicking our butt. China manufactures a small amount of stuff and a very little value added. I'm talking about other countries that are killing.
Do you think there's a major country that employs less of a percentage of their population in federal government jobs in America?
Is this a yes or no question?
You just said that countries are kicking our butt and they don't do the stupid stuff that we do, but we have less federal workers than most of these giant countries
But the
around
federal
the world.
government, here's something you guys aren't talking about right now, is the amount of money that this U.S. government has to borrow just to pay these salaries for these federal workers. Right now, the U.S. government borrows 40 cents on the dollar just to pay these inflated salary costs right now, Jonas. That's something that has actually reversed. It was actually only 20% just 3 years ago, and it keeps going up because the salaries
How is that
up.
the fault of the stable labor force that we've had in the federal government for 20 years
You
now?
can't offer these types of salaries.
Let's just go back to economics.
Look, the federal employment hasn't gone up, but the taxes have gone down. And maybe that explains the problem you just raised more than...
God bless you. God bless you. But here's one issue. Private jobs actually create wealth. Public companies suck money out of the economy, and they're very low efficient. Here's my Gary B. Smith speech
points,
here.
But don't.
We are talking about getting the economy back and getting jobs, and prosperity comes from private sector jobs. It does not come from transferring money from the efficient part of the world.
Then you should be happy because they are cutting government jobs every month. Look at the reports. You guys act like they're adding all these state and federal.
What we're debating here is why we should do another $40 billion to hire a bunch of people that we already can't afford that are all union workers anyway. I mean, that's the issue. We need to get back to sustainable growth.
Do you actually think that we don't need these teachers and these firefighters and these first responders? I mean, it shocks me when we just had the 10th anniversary of 9/11 that you would think we should have fewer police.
Laundry, landscape architect. We're not talking about the teachers and the firefighters.
Look at Europe, guys. That's where we're going.
That's got to be